Hey card making friends, welcome back. It's Sandy McIver here, and I'm back with some die cutting fun today. I'm creating with the Syberia Classic Foliage die set to make today's cards, and I'm also combining it with some new colors from Lindy's Magicals. This is Great White North and Northern Lights, and there are a bunch of new colors in these, and I'm going to grab 4 of them and make some backgrounds before I do my die cutting. So I'm going to be working with Polite People Purple, Maple Syrup Bronze, Poutine Gold, and Looney Tune Teals. I'm using Canson watercolor paper, and I have it cut in half, basically 5.5 inches wide, and then the length of the paper. I'm also going to be using Misty Sticky Mats, and this holds my paper flat for me so that I can get all of the magicals on there, and it also gives me something to hold on to when I want to pick it up and move it around. These things are great. As you can see, I use them a lot, and they are a very, very handy craft tool to have in your stash, and they're not expensive. You also need some water, a spritzer, a fan brush, and a surface to work on. I'm working on my white glass mat. Okay, we're starting off with the purple, and as you can see, these are new. Got to remove the seal on each one of them. There are 2 ways that you can add the magicals to your watercolor paper. You can do it dry or you can do it wet. I prefer to do it wet, as I'm demonstrating here. I spritz all of the paper first and then start adding the magicals, and you see that they activate instantly. The reason I do this is the dry powder, when you put it on dry and then you mist it, some of it moves and gets on your work surface, and this stuff is highly, highly pigmented. So if you get it in your carpet or you get it on your clothes and then you activate it with water, you have some pretty colors, but maybe in not the places you want them. So as you can see, I can pick up my piece of watercolor paper because it's stuck to my Misty mat, and I can move the water around to activate all of the colors. And there's quite a few different colors in each of these, as you can see. It's not just purple. There's blue, there's some pretty gold in there. And mixing them around and spreading them out and misting them to get everything activated. And we're going to end up with some beautiful, beautiful backgrounds. And as you can see, you can just tilt it, move it back and forth, add more pigment. I also have some paintbrushes up top that I can wet and then see the white spots on the edge. Some of them are dry, and that's why the pigment's not sticking to them. And you'll see in a couple secs here that I pick up my paintbrush and wet them and move some of the ink around just to get to those little dry spots. Because I've cut this at 5.5 inches, it is exactly the width of an A2 size card, so I am trying to get my edges as nice as possible. And I have paper towel underneath to catch any of the excess. Setting that aside on some paper towel to dry, and we're going to move on to the next color and the next piece of cardstock. Next up, we're going to do the Looney Tunes teal, and this stuff is absolutely beautiful. I didn't imagine how beautiful it was. In the picture on the container that it comes in, it's quite dark. Maybe I didn't use enough pigment, I don't know, but I got a beautiful light finish that is absolutely fabulous. So don't forget to clean out your brush. I bang mine on the side of my garbage can just to get any pigment out, because I don't want the purple mixed in with my teal. And again, I am just adding more water to activate the pigment. And we're going to pick it up and move it around. And as you move it around, you see that the colors start to set into the watercolor paper, which is what we want. And some of it's bleeding off into our paper towel. I've got quite a few dry spots that I'm just activating there. And I like to start on the light side, because number one, I don't want to waste my pigments. Oops! As you can see, this sticky mat is very well used and it's not sticking very well, so I'm trying to use my paintbrush ends to try and get it stuck back down, to no avail, I might add. Anyway, we can deal with it. A little warping is okay, it helps the water move around. So again, I am adding some more pigment to some of the spots that I would like a little bit darker, holding my paper down with my paintbrush to add more water and picking up the paper now and getting all my fingers dirty, but that's okay. So there's a bit of green in here as well, which is mixing in nicely. This is a really pretty pigment. All right, so cleaning up my work surface a little bit with a cleaner piece of paper towel. I reuse my paper towels numerous times, as you can tell. Have a whole stash of them. And what I'm showing you there is it's a good idea. I have a table just off to the left of my working area here where I am putting the pieces to dry, and I'm putting the little pots of the color in front of each one so that I know which one it is. Once they're dry, I like to turn them over on the back and I write down which of the pods I used of the Lindy's Magicals, because sometimes I don't use them all up. Like today, I'm making extra. And I have a file folder for them so that I can go back and use them at a later time for, different card projects. Okay, so this one is Maple Syrup Bronze, and it is unbelievably pretty. The shimmer doesn't show up very well in my cameras, but all of these have got a shimmer to them. There's mica in these powders. This thing is unbelievably pretty. Again, looking for my dry spots, picking this up and moving it around to get that pigment flowing and getting it to settle into my watercolor paper. Adding more pigment to the spots that are lighter than I would like them. And spritzing. Okay, there you go. This thing is fabulous. And again, just if you get a couple of dark spots like I have over there on the left-hand side, just add a little bit more water and then keep moving it around so the pigment covers all of your watercolor paper. And the final color for today, Poutine Gold. And I have sped this up so that we don't have to go through the slow motion of doing this because you've seen it 3 times already. But again, this one is another beauty. It's worth having some extra pieces, and I've decided I'm going to do another video a little bit down the road using this along with another color because I had a card idea right while I was doing this. And again, shaking it back and forth just to get all of your paper covered with the pigment, adding some more to the spots that aren't dark enough. And this one I didn't really like when it was wet, but once I dried it, man, it was pretty. And speaking of drying, we're coming up to that momentarily. Okay, here are the 4 pieces all dried. So starting with the gold, then moving on to the purple, the bronze, and then the teal. And so what I did was I set up a drying table and I used my heat tool and I heated most of the front, and you'll notice that as it dries it starts to curl, and when you get some curling just flip it over to the other side and add some more heat to it and it will flatten it out for you. Onto the die cutting. I am taping down all of the dies and I've decided on the teal for the first card, and I'm going to make a background with this, so I'm going to have peekaboo holes of the die cutting pieces. And I'm running it back and forth a couple of times because, of course, watercolor paper is a little bit thicker than regular paper, and I want to make sure I get a good die cut. And here's my first go through. And I tore a little piece of the paper when I took the tape off. I'll show you in a minute how to fix that. And I've also got a little bald spot down there, so I'm going to grab one of the dies and stick it on there and run it through again, just so that I've got a die cut in that one spot down in the right-hand corner. And I decide that there's another one up the top, and what I'm going to do is try and cut out the leaf right over top of where I lost a little bit of that color when the paper peeled. So there we go. I put the purple behind it because that was my original idea, but you know what? That bronze was so pretty. There's the gold, and I like that. It wasn't too bad, but I'll tell you, once I put it over the bronze, that was it. Game changer. Love that. It's going to make my card kind of thick, but that's okay. So I cut the bronze 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Also, my teal is the same color, and I'm using liquid glue, getting into all the little nooks and crannies of the die cut so that everything will stay nice and flat, layering it, making sure it's nice and straight. And then I'm taking a couple of acrylic handles and popping them down on top so that it dries flat and I get really, really good coverage. Here's how you fix that little problem. Wet your paintbrush and then dip it into the pigment and then add it directly to the spot that peeled. There you go. Easy. All right, second card. Look at this. We're getting a twofer out of this. Again, I am using the other piece of bronze because it was long enough that I could get 2 cards out of each piece, and I do that on purpose. And then again, adding liquid glue. I like using liquid glue because it gives me a couple of seconds to move it around. And I'm just starting to glue these down to the bronze card front. I like this color combination of the teal and the bronze. So again, this is maple syrup bronze and Looney Tooney teal. These guys have great names for their pigment inks. Okay, moving along, getting down there to the end. And as you can see, they're getting shorter and shorter as we go through. And I'm using the fine tip on my Barely Art glue. I love this thing for doing this type of really, really tiny die cuts, because then you don't have a whole bunch of glue oozing out all over the place. Mind you, it does dry clear if you do happen to get some oozing. Okay, and then there's the last little piece. And add another acrylic handle while it dries. Okay, so to put your cards together, I use tear tape because this is 2 pieces of watercolor paper, so it is super thick. I also used the corners on my score pal to attach it to the card front, make sure that it was on there nice and straight. And now I have flipped it over and opened up the inside just to trim off anything that is hanging over or sticking out. I like to do this. It makes a nice clean finish on my cards. There we go. Isn't that a pretty card? I just love that bronze that peeks through. Beautiful color combination, if I do say so myself. All right, the second one is ready to go, and basically we're doing the same thing. So I needed some sentiments, and so I have come to the Spring Garden Stamp and Die set, also from Syberia. And what I've done is I've taken all of the sentiments, and I have a half sheet of black in my MISTI. So I'm using my rabbit hole tool to make sure that I don't have anything sticky on my paper, and Versamark ink, making sure that these are inked up really well. And I'm going to stamp and ink them a couple of times because these are new. I've not used them before, and I want to make sure that they're conditioned and I get a really, really nice stamped image because I'm going to be embossing these. I'm going to do this twice. I'm going to emboss it in white and in gold, and this is kind of a shortcut. I like to do this a lot when I get a good set of sentiments because then I have all these extras that I can use without having to get everything out and cut it every single time I want to make a card. And this is an awesome set because I don't know if you noticed, but there is a die for every single one of these. So that makes die cutting super easy as well, which I'll show you in just a sec here. So I'm just finishing up, making sure I've got good coverage on my white, and then I'm going to heat set them all. Just takes a few minutes, and here's the finished. And I have my second sheet of black, popping it in. I am making sure everything's lined up, using my rabbit hole embossing tool to make sure there's no stickies on my paper. Sorry, my camera does not like blank things, white or black. Again, inking it up, and again doing it twice to make sure I get good coverage. And then this one is going to be covered in gold embossing powder, fine gold, I think from Simon Says Stamp. And then we're going to heat set this one as well. So that little trip ended up with 2 whole sheets of embossed images. And as you can see, I have taped all of the dies into place and I've run them through, and I end up with all of these sentiments, which is awesome. So again, I have cut out the thanks 3 times and I have stacked them, and I've got it on my teal card on the left-hand side. And then I can add a second sentiment underneath of it. And my card on the right, I've decided on which sentiment I'm using for that. Again, the Barely Art glue works really well on getting some ink on, or some glue onto the back of these guys and attaching them to the card. I'm going right over top of my dies. I have a little sequin stuck underneath there that I had to dig out. And I cut some foam tape squares into little pieces so that they would fit on the back of these long, skinny sentiments so that I can attach it to my card. So that's the sentiments for this one. I have some sequins that I'm kind of playing with there, deciding where I want them. One of them's got glue on it, so it's stuck to my finger. And I am using my Barely Art glue again to attach them. And this set of sequins is called Flowering Clover Sequins and from Simon Says Stamp. For the second card, I'm going to add my sentiment again with little pieces of foam tape that are cut in half, and that's going in the bottom left-hand corner. And I have some Stay Gold sequins for this one. I didn't have any bronze, and the teal that I had was a little bit too bright, too green, and so I went with the gold. It looks beautiful on this bronze background. I'll zoom it in there for you so you can actually see what I'm doing. And the sequins are a few different sizes, so I used a couple of the large ones at the bottom and then went for the little tiny ones up at the top. And it just adds a nice finish. I left a lot of wide open space at the top though, which is kind of cool. I love this color combination. So there you go. There's my Twofere cards for today, designed with the Classic Foliage die set from Syberia. And all the supplies are listed below underneath this video. There's also a link over to the blog where there's detailed descriptions of how to make the cards and a list of the supplies used. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please share it with your friends and consider giving me a thumbs up. I would appreciate it so much. And until next time, toodles!